it all your soul now. You wanna give it all your heart now. You wanna give it all your soul now. Come on, give it all your heart now. Come on, give it all your soul now. Come on, give it all you got now. If you're ready, then let it show now. Come on, give it all your heart now. Come on, give it all your soul now. Come on, give it all you got now. If you're ready, then let it show now. Cause you're in love, spontaneously in love. Oh, you're in love, unexpectedly in love. Oh, you're in love, overwhelmingly in love. And it's the first day, the very first day of your life. Oh, it's your birthday, the very first day of your life. Oh, it's your birthday, the very first day of your life. Take a chance and just dive in. There can be no wrong timing. Gonna give it your best shot. Gonna give it all you got. Take a chance and just dive in. There can be no wrong timing. Gonna give it your best shot. Gonna give it all you got. Take a chance and just dive in. There can be no wrong timing. Gonna give it your best shot. Gonna give it all you got.
Hello and welcome to the Stimme in Africa's Short Story Festival. We are here live with Olumide Popoola to read and discuss her short story, The Swimmer. I would like to welcome and introduce all the people involved in this project in association with Stimme in Africa's. We have Oliver El Fayumi, who will be reading for us today. We have as an interpreter Jutta Himmelreich, and I will be introducing all of these persons together with our amazing technical producer, Momo Jaffer, who is making sure that you're seeing us live and you're listening to us the best way that you can. I will introduce Oliver El Fayumi, who is an actor, speaker, and theatre maker who you'll be hearing very shortly. He studied acting at the Folkwang University in Essen. This was followed by engagements at the Düsseldorfer Schauspielhaus, Theater Biel Solothurn, and many others. He is the founder of the Theater Fayum and was in 2019 awarded the Förderpreis für Darstellende Kunst of the city of Düsseldorf. He works as a narrator for WDR, DLF, and freelances in his own studio. Our translator for today, who has translated this wonderful work by Olumide Popoola, is Sarah Bremer, who studies literary translation in the master's program at Heinrich Heine University in Düsseldorf and translates from English into German. Also in Düsseldorf, she completed her bachelor's degree in English and American Studies and Linguistics in 2018. Our interpreter today, who makes sure that we can understand each other in both English and German, has worked as a literary translator, interpreter, and lecturer in German, English, French, Spanish, and Persian, among other languages. I will finally introduce our special guest, Olumide Popoola, who joins us from very, very far away, but thankfully with the technical know-how of Momo Jaffer, who's our technical producer, without whom all of this would be possible. We can see Olumide live in the studio. Olumide is a London-based Nigerian-German writer whose publications include essays, poetry, the novella This Is Not About Sadness, the play Also by Mail, the short story collection Breach, as well as many others. In 2004, she won the Mai Ayim Award in the category of poetry, and was the first black, which is the first black German literary award. She has a PhD in creative writing and has lectured in creative writing in various universities. I look forward to introducing Olumide Popoola shortly, and we will go into the conversation very briefly, but I want to outline the event and what we'll be doing today. So this evening, we will be having two parts of this program. The first part will be two readings from the translated story and conversations with the author. We will also have conversations with the translator. In the second part, we will have questions from the audience. However, if you would like your questions to be answered, please listen to this short video which has all the technical information on how to set up your interpretation channel. Please watch.
Diese Veranstaltung ist bilingual. Für eine Verdolmetschung ins Deutsche klicken Sie bitte auf den Link, der nun im Chat eingestellt wird. Dieser führt Sie ins Zoom-Webinar, wo Jutta Himmelreich heute für Sie simultan dolmetschen wird. Nachdem Sie auf den Link klicken und im Zoom-Webinar sind, sollten Sie die drin gebliebene Webseite schließen, um Tonprobleme zu verhindern. Im Zoom-Webinar finden Sie nun unten in der Leiste des Zoom-Fensters die Funktion Dolmetschen. Diese erkennen Sie an dem Globus-Symbol. Wenn Sie dort draufklicken, können Sie den entsprechenden Audiokanal auswählen, um die Sprache Ihrer Wahl zu hören. Wenn Sie auf Inaktiv klicken, hören Sie keine Verdolmetschung, sondern nur das Originalaudio. Wenn Sie auf Deutsch klicken, hören Sie die Verdolmetschung ins Deutsche. Um nur die gedolmetschte Sprache zu hören, können Sie optional auf Originalaudio Stummschalten klicken. Wir empfehlen jedoch, das Originalaudio aktiv zu lassen, also nicht auf Originalaudio Stummschalten zu klicken. Dann hören Sie die Verdolmetschung sowie den Originalton in reduzierter Lautstärke. Wir wünschen Ihnen viel Vergnügen.
Thank you very much, and I hope that you are able to join us and send in your questions, because we will not be able to take questions in the second part. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Do send us your questions and we will be glad to answer them very shortly. So Olumide Popoola, you are very welcome. Welcome to this program of the Short Story Festival.
Thank you so much.
How is London today?
Oh, sunny and bright.
Great, great. So we're here to talk about your short story, The Swimmer. And I was immediately taken by the title. And the reason why I was taken by the title is that there are many short stories that have this title, The Swimmer. And you know, as we know, especially in short stories, the whole idea of water as a metaphor, swimming as a metaphor, buoyancy as a metaphor, is one that is a very well-known device. How do you think of water and swimming as a metaphor?
Yeah, I think swimming itself, as in this context for me, is very much about the emotional state of the narrator and the main character, and not quite knowing where they are at, if they, you know, how they should feel about where they are at this particular moment. I don't want to give too much away before we hear the reading, because we're actually able to hear most of the story today. And so that's sort of the metaphor, is really the emotional state of the character. But I'm also interested in the river as a space, and this liminal space, in between space. It's not land, but you're not floating all the way out to sea. And it's sort of a crossing. It's also somewhere where you go with your grief and to leave your grief. And of course, that's one thing I can say. This person is grieving, so they're seeking out the river. That's sort of my starting point for that.
Thank you very much. And one question I thought of was, are you a swimmer yourself?
I like the water. I can swim. I'm not very keen on swimming. I'm keen on being in the water. Yeah. So, yeah. So I have not done what the character has done.
So I asked this question to help our audience imagine how a writer might inhabit the worlds of others. How do you bridge the gap between the world of your narrator and your own world if you are not your narrator?
Obviously, and as a writer, you know this too. Obviously, we always draw on something in our own lives, and if that, and we're placing emotions that we had somewhere else in other situations and imagine out. So, yeah, I thought it was an interesting. I don't want to give the opening scene away, so I'm not going to
Yes,
say that
yes.
now. But I thought it was very, very interesting to imagine someone trying to recreate and find something on the river. But I had to work on it, and I went for a walk. It's playing at the River Lee here in London, and I went for a walk because I also had to see whether it's actually possible, whether you can get into the water. Or am I making this just up? And it would have to be like this very dramatic jump. I didn't want it to be a dramatic jump. I wanted it to be very casual affair. Actually really dramatic, but looking very casual. So I had this image first, and then I had to check it out in real life. And I mean, not check it out, I didn't do it, but I went to the location and looked at the possibilities, and from there imagined it further.
Great. So, I mean, shortly we will be taking a very short reading, a first reading of the story. But before we do that, I want to ask, now that you've explained the process of going to this River Lee and looking at things, how much does researching a short story affect the writing itself? And does it always come in a certain order? Do you research the subject before you write it, or do you, while writing it, go and look at the area that you're trying to talk about? And in this case, for example, how much did being at the River Lee actually affect the story? Was it affected before the story, while the story was being written, or afterward?
I think the scene was very strong in my mind, very clearly from the start. But as I said, I needed to look at it. But there's something quite trivial element to it, that I was also interested in the specific part of London, and this is very East London, and there's places you can go down. So even though they don't actually play a big role in that, in this short story, they played a big role for me. I'm really fascinated by London and different parts of London. So I have two novels, or one is a novella that played in London, and this story again is another unearthing of something London night for me. And there's another character that's somehow interacting with the city and with the city space in a way that we're not necessarily expecting, or that is a bit unusual. So research can go both ways. It can I believe in research. I think you should do a lot of research when you're writing. I do a lot of research, and it depends on, I think, each scene, whether that comes beforehand or whether then, like here I had a strong image and then I went for the facts. But other times I might research first and then, imagine the scene accordingly.
Thank you very much for that. I'm thinking of, you're talking about this strong sense of place, especially because you have firmly situated us, at the River Lee. We will come to this story and we'll hear the reading, and our audience will be able to hear where this River Lee is and what the context of this is. But, suffice it to say, we're talking about the swimmer and that there is a river. How strong is this sense of place and space in your work in short stories as opposed to, say, novels? Do you find it stronger in short fiction, especially because we're talking about short stories today? Do you find it stronger in short fiction, or do you think that you are able to explore more with the longer work, like, say, in your novel?
That's a great question. I think in a short story, I want to hone in very, very clearly on where we are and what's going on. So in a way, the place is very important, but sometimes the place can just be the living room, right? But you want to be very precise, very quickly. So I feel the sense of you need to ground people, and especially short stories, I think, are really beautiful device of showing things that are unfinished, right? Because you have a very short amount of time. So here we have something that's not resolved, and maybe it is resolved, but that needs a very firm grounding for the reader, so that you're very sure where you are. So I think, yes, you can, in a novel you can explore more, and obviously you have loads of different places that you're exploring where, so it's a very interesting question, maybe not answerable you can't completely answer it. I'm not supposed to ask you, right? Because we're not that kind of
We're here for you, Olumide.
What do you do?
So I will go ahead and ask, so now that we've talked about the sense of place, before we go into the reading, and we'll take this after discussing this, we have the title, The Swimmer, in English. We'll come to the translation and what that means, but can you tell us about how much you place in the title of a short story, and whether you think that, like many people, that a short story starts with its title? How much do you want the reader to sort of read into this title?
Absolutely, it's super important, especially short story. I think that's almost, that's your dotted I, isn't it? It brings it all together. So it's very, very important. Maybe, I don't want to say more than in a novel, but in a novel you have lots of space to explain, and this is going on, and yes, we're following them from start to finish. You don't have that space. I think titles in general are very, very difficult because they can do a lot of heavy lifting for you as a writer. So and we will come to that, what that means in different languages. So as innocently as The Swimmer is in English, it wasn't quite as easy in German to find the equivalent, although it's not a difficult word, of course.
Yes, we will certainly come to that in German. I was thinking about whether there are other titles that have struck you in the way the writer was able to embed meaning and metaphor in the title itself, and how much of that probably you might have gained from.
You mean other short story writers in general?
Influences, yes.
Or you mean for this story in particular?
Well, we can answer both. So let's take one in general. How much do you think of short story titles? Are there any that sort of come to mind or that stick? And if not for this short story, we can also come there.
Yeah, give me time when they do the reading. I'll have a little bit
of
a think. Yeah.
Okay. So while you think, sorry, you can.
Okay.
I was going to ask Oliver, who's our amazing reader for today, to get right into the reading while you think of that. At this point, we will be looking at the first text passage reading in German, and I would like you to join Oliver as he reads this first passage.
Schwimmend von Olumide Popoola. Übersetzt von Sarah Bremer. Unter der Oberfläche verschwamm die Sonne beim Blick nach oben. Das Wasser floss über mein Gesicht, war aber nicht genug, um in meine Nasenlöcher zu dringen. Ich suchte nach ihm. Ich wollte wissen, wie es ist, zu ertrinken, keine Luft mehr zu bekommen, weil du erstickst. Natürlich hielt ich nicht durch. Mir fehlte der Wille und ehrlich gesagt fehlten mir die Gründe. Dir dein eigenes Leben zu nehmen, ist schwer. Ich glaube, es liegt nicht in der Natur unseres Körpers. Was für ein Aufwand, unglaublich. Das wusste ich, bevor ich mit all meinen Klamotten in den Lee sprang. Du musstest das Ganze inszenieren und alle Faktoren bedenken. Ich hatte lediglich Mams Haus nach einem nicht so ungewöhnlichen, aber trotzdem merkwürdigen Morgen verlassen. Aus irgendeinem Grund bin ich direkt los nach Hackney Wick und dachte, schauen wir uns das mal an. Das Ertrinken. Mam war stabil, wie wir beide es nannten, aber hiervon eher auf der instabilen Seite. Sie hatte in einem großen Karton herumgewühlt, der mit Kleidung vollgepackt war. Ich dachte, sie würde nach etwas suchen, das Jabori gehörte. Dieses Jahr waren es 10 Jahre. Ich dachte, sie würde in Erinnerungen schwelgen und eine mir bekannte oder unbekannte Geschichte über meinen toten Bruder erzählen. Stattdessen holte sie einen Rock hervor. Diesen hatte sie getragen, als sie in einem völlig anderen Leben nach Palästina gereist war, als sie, wie sie es selbst formulierte, wirklich eine Fotografin, als Fotografin gearbeitet hatte. Ich hätte die Geschichte des Rocks liebend gerne gehört. Die Geschichte von der Reise, von damals. Die Geschichten, in die sie das Wörtchen wirklich einfließen ließ. Aber ihre Stimme hatte bereits diesen gewissen Klang. Ich nahm ihn selbst im leisesten Flüstern wahr und hörte genau, wo auf dem Spektrum einer manischen Episode sie sich befand. Genauso war es bei Einlieferungen in die Klinik. Ich träumte von ihrem Tod und kurz darauf wurde sie ausnahmslos eingeliefert. Meistens per Zwangseinweisung, aber manchmal ging sie auch freiwillig. Wer tatsächlich gestorben war, war Jabori. Von ihm hatte ich nicht geträumt. 2 Morgenjogger wurden langsamer, als sie mich sahen. Sie sahen aus wie eines dieser Paare mit gemeinsamen Hobbys. Für die meisten Leute war es immer noch zu früh. Mom und ich waren uns um 4 Uhr morgens in der Küche begegnet. Sie war früh aufgewacht und ich hatte, seit ich Temi im Club zurückgelassen hatte, noch gar nicht geschlafen. »Brauchst du Hilfe?« »Sehr viel«, dachte ich. »Aber da ist nichts, was ihr für mich tun könntet.« »Alles gut«, antwortete ich stattdessen. »Kühle mich nur von meinem Rausch ab.« Es war nicht die Wahrheit, aber ich hatte ja auch nichts von Drogen gesagt. Meine Augen brannten nicht und waren weder überanstrengt noch entzündet, aber das kühle Wasser beruhigte auf jeden Fall meine Augenlider. Es war also eine Version der Wahrheit. Kleine Blätter bedeckten die Oberfläche, und es wirkte schön und verheißungsvoll, wie die Morgensonne vom sich bewegenden Wasser gefiltert wurde, bevor sie meine Augen erreichte. Mein Langarm-Shirt verfärbte sich moosgrün, auch das Grün, die Farbe, kühlend. Temi hatte von einer erzählt, die wir beide kannten und die das Wohnzimmer von einer anderen umgeräumt hatte. Ist das nicht krass? Die Frau war mal eben weg, um Bier zu holen, und als sie zurückkam, waren alle Lampen umgestellt. Die Kissen neu arrangiert, der Sessel stand woanders, Papiere und Bücher lagen auf einem Regal und nicht auf dem Tisch. Das alles innerhalb von 15 Minuten. Es war ein völlig anderer Raum. Ich schaute sie mit einem »Und weiter« Gesicht an. Ich sagte »Und weiter?« Meine Freundin flippte aus. Sie wusste nicht, wie sie damit umgehen sollte. Auf einmal wurde ich müde, sehr müde. »Lass uns in den anderen Club gehen«, sagte sie. Ich folgte ihr, so bin ich eben. Ich folge Temi und lasse zu, dass sie meine Berührungen zulässt, nur um dann für die nächsten 2 Wochen nichts von ihr zu hören. Danach machen wir die Nächte von Donnerstagabend bis Montagmorgen durch, wenn ich das schaffe. In letzter Zeit konnte ich es nicht immer durchziehen. Und da war ich nun, am Sonntagmorgen. Nüchtern, allein, schwimmend, ohne irgendetwas zu tun, einfach nur auf dem Rücken treibend. Die Jogger schauten mich immer noch an. »Ehrlich, bei mir ist alles okay. Ich weiß, es sieht komisch aus.« Ich hob den Kopf und zeigte ihnen mein vollkommen gesundes Gesicht. Probleme, wie sie jeder hatte, aber nichts, das offizielles Eingreifen erforderte. Zumindest dachte ich das. Ich winkte sogar und lachte. »Ihr würdet nicht glauben, wie meine Nacht und mein Morgen waren. Ehrlich, ich kühle mich nur ab.« »Ah, dann alles klar.« Sie waren während des gesamten Gesprächs auf der Stelle gejoggt. Ein Fuß auf dem Boden, den anderen in der Luft. Die Arme nah am Oberkörper, immer in Bewegung. »In einer halben Stunde kommen wir noch mal vorbei, wenn... Ich werde nicht mehr hier sein, keine Sorge.« Das hoffte ich zumindest.
Lovely reading by Oliver L. Fayumi. Thank you very much for that. Olumide, we've listened to this amazing first passage from the story, The Swimmer. You know, one of the things that struck me was, especially in keeping with this whole buoyancy, this idea of being underwater or partially submerged, the story has a certain dreamlike quality to it, whether it's when it's in its state of melancholy, or whether it is when it's giving us this slight intimations of what is about to come. I, I was wondering what you thought about metaphors in general, and the reason why I'm asking this is I was talking to a writer, and they seemed to say, writers usually lean very heavily on metaphors sometimes, and some people have very different ideas of whether or not we lean too heavily on metaphors or all of that. How do you relate to metaphors, especially as you use them here? Because we see these intimations in the short story. We see all of these subtle hints. We see the story. We see the person being partially submerged. We see the blurriness of the sun. We see the fact that this person is in the water with clothes on. What is your relationship to metaphor, and especially with regard to this story in particular?
I don't know if you can lean too heavy on metaphor. I think you can kill one particular metaphor. It depends on how you work with it, right? And I think here, even though it is a metaphor, and as you said, it has many elements to it, at the same time, it's also very clear. It's not difficult to work out. We spell it out quite quickly. Let's see this thing drowning. Yeah, so that's how it's in English. And in German is lass uns mal sehen, wie dieses Ertrinken geht, something like that. So immediately we're told what's going on. You don't have to work it out. So it is both clear and not clear. What was the questions? How I feel about working with that? I really like this dreamlike quality of the story, and I think the water is perfect for that, and I think most of us know this. When you're in water, your body feels different, right? So it's real and it's not real. It's happening. You have a sense of suspension. So time feels differently. So it is a metaphor. And I think it's not for me to say how successful it is or if it's overdone. Obviously, I'm not going to say it's overdone. I think it's brilliant. It's my story. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you. I was going to keep with the metaphors just a bit. I was looking at the fact that the mother repots plants and the projectiles that are coming from the mother, and how ultimately this character is afraid of these kind of projectiles hitting them even when they have interactions with other people. Would you like to talk more about the metaphor of this throwing items, this pots flying, this character having this loom large in their mind?
So the mother is bipolar, and when she's throwing these things, or when these things happen, she's in a manic phase where, if you know anything about mania, this is it can be loud. It's it's feelings of grandeur and ecstasy, and sometimes it can also get loud in an uncomfortable way. I'm not necessarily implying here that the mother is sort of unpredictable or not aggressive, but she's unpredictable, and that is the thing, that the narrator is running away from this unpredictability that they cannot escape. So they're seeking refuge in the river to escape all the things that are going on that they cannot control. So I was really mostly interested not so much in the metaphor, but in exploring mental health, and especially manic episodes. So I know quite a few people who deal with mental health issues, and I think we speak a lot about depression, and I was really particularly interested in the manic part that I don't see often. I don't see represented enough in a three-dimensional way. So that I feel like, okay, so there's different elements to it. So we also have this, I just want to check whether that's in there already. This conversation she has, that they have with that other, with Timmy, about somebody having a manic episode and being very sensitive to the light, and therefore rearranging a whole room. So yeah, I was interested.
I was going to ask that next, actually,
okay.
But carry on.
I know, ask it, and then I'll...
No. I was going to say that I thought that the whole idea of somebody rearranging another person's living room struck me. And I remember writing down as a note, what's the significance of this rearranging someone else's living room? And I thought of it not just with reference to this other person that they were referring to, but with reference to the main character themselves. Is someone else rearranging their living room? Has someone else
Yeah.
come into their life and rearranged their living room? Am I reading it wrongly?
Yeah, I think you're right. They are in their living room, and I don't know where things are, and whether things are in the right place, and it's frightening. And yet, this is also a very practical thing that could have happened in a manic phase. So, if you know people, that's just like these just odd things. You pop up for a minute, and all of a sudden, this and that has happened. And I think I'm seeking for, in a way, the narrator is bridging there between, because they have that intimate knowledge through their mother, and just want to converse with their hopefully more constant lover. So they want to give that insight that this is kind of normal. If you're having an episode, you might want to do that just because you're frightened by the light. But at the same time, it's troubling to them because their mother is also troubling to them because it's a bit too unsteady, especially at this particular moment it's not a moment, I wouldn't say it's a moment of crisis, but it's definitely a moment of where things are stirred up yet again.
Great. Thank you very much. I come back again to at least one more of these, because I think that one of the things that this short story does pretty well is these intimations, these connections to larger themes that weave the story very gently but very firmly, so that in the end, by the time we're at the end of the rope, we have fully grasped, at least to the extent that this character wants us to, the image in the character's mind and how the events in their life affects them. And I was thinking of the significance of this character submerging themselves with their clothes on, and what perhaps that means. Because I was thinking of this, and I was wondering, what could the significance of this be in the life of this character, that they don't go in without clothes, and especially as they thought of this drowning and all of the variables that one should consider when one wants to kill themselves, and they go in with their clothes on. Does this mean anything in particular, or am I being a bit too extra?
So in my mind, obviously, because I have a much larger universe in mind, because they are tracing their brother's steps, I don't think necessarily if you're trying to drown yourself that you're taking your clothes off, depending what type of person you are. So in my mind, which is not in the story, the brother would have also done this with clothes on. So they are being faithful to that. But all the other variables they're not considering, because it's you don't just lie in the water and drown. You have to do something for that to happen. So in a way, they're just going this far. So there is, in a way, that they're wearing clothes is not in itself a metaphor, but it is just a recreation, this trying to feel into. I don't know. It's not in feeling into the shoes. Obviously, it's feeling into the feeling of what the start of the drowning might have felt like. And so that's why also, if you don't have the clothes on, then it is swimming. Even though it's called The Swimmer, this is not going swimming. This is not about swimming. Not about this swimming anyway. This
so would you like to talk more about this, about this title? And I know you wanted to talk a little more about that earlier, about the significance, now that we've read the story, because you didn't want to give the story away.
So the swimming is more...
Yes.
Yeah. The swimming is more the drowning. And the drowning here, we don't know who's drowning. We know someone has drowned. And then the main character is perhaps drowning with grief, or drowning with, what to do with their mother, who's seemingly going down a manic route at this point in time. We're not 100% sure, but it sounds like it. So for me, it's definitely not swimming as a sport, that's sport swimming, but it's as in drowning. So the swimmer is a metaphor for something much harder to deal with. And I liked the swimmer because who is the swimmer? Is it the person, the narrator? Is it the mother, who's also obviously something is running away with the mother as well? Is it the brother who drowned? And then swimming becomes a metaphor, and that's the beauty for all of you to fill in as you please. I mean, I have my idea, but it's all of them. It could be all of them. And it's in a way that unites them, as different as they all are. There's an element of this drowning, either really drowning or either as a metaphor for emotional state and well-being or emotional distress.
Great. Thank you. Before we went on that last break and before we go straight to the second text passage that we're going to read, you were going to tell us about other short stories that you might have drawn some inspiration from, other titles that you thought were worth mentioning. Do you have anything for us?
Again, not necessarily for the swimmer so much, but when you were asking me, I was thinking of Zizi Packer, and who's an amazing short story writer. And one of the stories is called Brownies, and it fits the story so well. And again, this sense of doing heavy lifting. It is about Girl Scouts. I think they are called Brownies, but there is also already there is issues around race in that story, and Brownies brings it again full circles in a way. So I think that's a good example for me as well.
Great. Thank you very much. Now we will go to the second passage from your amazing story, The Swimmer. And here is Oliver El-Fayumi reading the second passage from The Swimmer.
Mom hatte mit dem langen Rock herumgewedelt und ihn sich dann über den Kopf gehängt, so dass der Stoff über ihre Schultern fiel. »Das hast du doch immer gemacht? So getan, als würde sich dein Haar bewegen, obwohl es kurz war.« Inzwischen war es 5:30 Uhr morgens. Ich war müde. »Mom, da war ich wahrscheinlich 3 oder 4. »Ja, meine Röcke waren viel zu lang«, antwortete sie. Sie lachte auf diese übertriebene Art, die du nur kennst, wenn du einen Elternteil mit einer ernsten, bipolaren Störung hast. Dieser schrille Klang, der die Aufmerksamkeit von Leuten auf sich zog, den sie jedoch nicht wirklich zuordnen konnten. Die Lautstärke zu aufgedreht, und in ihren Augen war etwas Unerklärliches. Sie zog den Stuhl nah an den Tisch heran. Innerlich dachte ich, oh. Vor 2 Jahren war sie auf den Stuhl geklettert, dann auf den Küchentisch, hatte nach den Blumentöpfen gegriffen, die auf dem Fenstersims unter dem Küchenfenster standen, die Minze genommen und an die gegenüberliegende Wand geworfen, dann das Basilikum und den Thymian, der am schwersten war, und den Rosmarin. Ich war wegen einer weiteren Clubnacht in der Nähe ihrer Wohnung bei ihr gewesen. Noch nicht mit Temi, noch nicht mit ihr allein, sondern mit einer Gruppe von Freunden, zu denen sie gehörte. Eine Vase mit toten Blumen folgte. Als ich von der Küchentür aus »Warum?« schrie, meinte Mom, sie würde umtopfen. Es war Frühling. Sie warf noch viele andere Dinge, die sich über Hüfthöhe befanden, bis die Nachbarn, die unter ihr wohnten, die Polizei riefen. Es war noch nicht mal so schlimm. Ein bisschen laut vielleicht. Warum musste sie denn eingewiesen werden, nur weil sie in ihrer eigenen Wohnung ein paar Sachen geworfen hatte, hatten wir beide gefragt. Aber der Polizeibeamte war gar nicht darauf eingegangen. Da war natürlich das schrille Lachen, wobei er doch unmöglich wissen konnte, was das bedeutete. Nun waren 2 Jahre vergangen, ein anderer Frühling und ein wichtiger Jahrestag. Ich stellte mich auf das Schlimmste ein. Ich brauchte eine Abkühlung, etwas, das mich entspannte. Sie stieg nicht auf den Tisch. Ich stieg das Flussufer hinunter. Ich hätte es mit dem Gesicht nach unten machen sollen, hätte versuchen sollen, mein Gesicht so lange wie möglich unter Wasser zu halten und unterzutauchen. Aber ich wusste bereits, dass mein Gesicht sich aus dem Wasser drehen würde, sobald es ging. Das macht der Körper eben, wenn er kann, mein Körper zumindest. Mom hatte den Rock heruntergenommen und sich an den Tisch gesetzt. Wir müssen reden. Es gab nichts, was ich mehr fürchtete als Gespräche mit Mom. Sie konnten sein wie das Umtopfen. Alles Mögliche konnte auf mir landen, alles wurde auseinandergenommen und mir entgegengeworfen. Dinge, die ich nicht bereit war zu hören, Einzelheiten, die ich nicht ertragen konnte. Ich ging. Das Shirt zog mich nach unten, genau wie meine Jogginghose. Das Wasser war zu kalt, um noch länger drin zu bleiben. Meine Lippen hatten angefangen zu zittern. Ich machte mir Sorgen wegen der Jogger. Wenn sie wiederkämen und ich wäre immer noch hier, was würden sie dann tun? Temi hatte uns gehetzt und Abkürzungen genommen, die ich nicht kannte, durch muffige Seitenstraßen. Vielleicht war es das Licht? Ich wusste nicht, ob sie überhaupt zuhörte. Das Licht könnte der Auslöser gewesen sein, und deshalb hat sie die Lampen umgestellt. Das gibt es bei Manie, Lichtempfindlichkeit. Ich stolperte ihr hinterher. Ihr langes Shirt hing über den zerrissenen Shorts und bewegte sich um ihre Beine, dort wo meine Hände hin wollten. Sie stoppte plötzlich und zog mich nah an sich heran. »Es ist nicht so, dass ich dich nicht mag. Ich mag dich sogar sehr.« Innerlich duckte ich mich. Flogen etwa gleich Kräutertöpfe in meine Richtung? Sie küsste mich, und ich saugte an ihren Lippen, bis sie ihren Kopf zurückzog. »Es ist nur, du redest nicht. Du bist nicht wirklich anwesend. Du verschwindest einfach und wartest. Im übertragenen Sinn.« Ihr Blick haftete an mir, während sie rückwärts ging, ihre Hände winkten mir, ihr zu folgen. Das tat ich. Im Club tanzten wir und küssten uns noch ein wenig, und sie flüsterte mir etwas ins Ohr, das ich nicht hören konnte. Als sie zur Toilette ging, rannte ich aus dem Club und nahm den Bus zu Mom nach Hause. Ich lehnte den Kopf gegen die Scheibe. Ich schrieb ihr irgendwas von einem Notfall, dass ich mich melden würde. Es war das erste Mal, dass ich zuerst gegangen war. Außerdem war es das erste Mal, dass Temi so mit mir geredet hatte. Ich hatte mich immer und immer wieder über ihre unverbindliche Art beschwert. Ich hatte mit meinen Freunden über ihre unzuverlässige Libido oder was auch immer es war gesprochen, darüber, dass sie vermutlich eine ganze Reihe Affären hatte und nicht wusste, was echte Nähe war. Sie hielt mich hin, meinte es nicht ernst, war nicht an mir interessiert und rief mich nur aus Langeweile an. Wir hatten es immer wieder durchgekaut, meine Freunde und ich. Temi hatte ich immer nur gesagt, »Klar, ich hab Zeit. Lass uns ausgehen.« Vor der Sache mit dem Rock hatte Mom gefragt, was los war, und gesagt, dass sie mich in dieser Nacht nicht erwartet hatte. Wie lief es mit der jungen Dame? Überall war Wasser. Der Fluss war voll davon. Gleich zweimal in einer Nacht hatte ich eine Frau zurückgelassen, für die ich komplizierte, aber tiefe Gefühle hatte. Ich stieg aus dem Wasser ans Ufer hinauf und saß mit angezogenen Knien und um die Schienbeine geschlungenen Armen auf der Bank. Es tropfte wie verrückt, und das Wasser schmolz ins Holz. Die Jogger kamen zurück. Sie lächelten, als sie mich auf festem Boden sitzen sahen. Ich sollte vermutlich reingehen, nach Hause. Vermutlich. Sie liefen nun nicht mehr, sondern waren zum Stehen gekommen. Der Typ, es waren ein Mann und eine Frau, griff meine Hand und zog mich von der Bank. Die Frau nahm meinen anderen Arm. Sie hob mein Handy auf, meine Oystercard und die Schlüssel, die ich auf der Wiese vor dem Abhang, der zum Wasser führte, liegen gelassen hatte. »Heute wird vielleicht sogar ein warmer Tag.« »Ja, sieht ganz danach aus«, antwortete ich. Wir setzten uns in Bewegung, und meine Turnschuhe machten ein schlürfendes Geräusch. »Wie war das Wasser?« fragte sie. »Kalt?« Ich nickte. Wir kamen dort vorbei, wo man ein paar Stufen zur Bushaltestelle hinaufgehen musste. Ich wollte etwas sagen, aber es fühlte sich richtig an, das Gehen.
Thank you again to Oliver for that amazing reading. So, Olumide, we come back to your story. One of the things I was thinking of when I listened to this passage, or when I actually read the whole story, was intertextuality, which is essentially the literary theory that all literature is a derivation or has been influenced by a previous work of literature, and that this can take many different forms. And the reason I was thinking of this is that when I first saw your story, The Swimmer, I thought of John Cheever's The Swimmer. I also thought of many other stories that had swimming, say, for example, Jhumpa Lahiri's In Other Words, in which he uses this large metaphor of swimming. But especially with John Cheever, there are a few things that I thought, had this kind of similarity. So for example, we had somebody swimming, and the idea of the main character in your story talking about wanting to walk off the high. And in John Cheever, we have this main character who is getting drunker and drunker and drunker as they swim. How do you think of intertextuality? Is it something that features prominently in your work? Or is it something you think about?
Yeah, at times, yes. I have to confess, not for The Swimmer, not in this way with this story, because I hadn't read John Cheever's story at that point. And for the record, the character in The Swimmer is not high. They're just saying it to make it palatable what they're doing, because it's so weird. Yeah, I think we're all completely influenced by all the things we do. And I think as a writer, one thing for me why I want to be a writer, or what my writing is about in some ways, is to be in dialogue. With thoughts, with ideas, with other works, with readers, with other writers. So that's the big desire, is something, to add something and to be part of a conversation. And often these influences are not necessarily, you don't always kind of know who slips into your work or who doesn't. So I think they're sort of subconscious at times. But yeah, I agree that they were definitely influenced by everything we consume and engage with. I often, when I'm writing, I read more nonfiction. Actually, I read a lot of critical texts and theory texts and stuff like that, and that often influences me. Generally, not so much for The Swimmer, but generally, that's how I kind of bounce off my ideas and maybe prevent that things slip too unfiltered into my fiction from someone else's fiction. So you end up like, ooh, you write a whole novel, and then that was just that other person's idea. So that makes sense.
So do you, like other writers, suspend reading mid writing?
Yeah.
Because of this fear?
The fear too, but also I don't really want to immerse in your world right now, because I have to pay attention to the world I'm creating. So it's the fear. I don't have a huge fear, but it's this whole, I need to stay here now in my world and flesh that all out. Yes, for sure. When I'm heavy in it, yes.
Oh, that's interesting. Now I'll come back to this story I talked about that Jhumpa Lahiri wrote, and she wrote this book called In Other Words, where she writes in Italian, and what she does is that she immerses herself in this language for a couple of years and decides that during this period she was going to completely immerse herself. And she uses the example of swimming, and she always said that she always swam into a certain lake, and not too deep, never too far out. And then one day she decided to swim all the way to the other end, unaided, without any sort of support. And for her, this was a larger metaphor to talk about how she abandoned English as sort of her anchor while she was learning Italian. Now, and the reason why I talk about this is not just the metaphor of swimming, or it's about language. And I'm going to pull up something that you said yourself about translation, about movement of stories from one language to the other. You've said before, and forgive me if I get any of the quotes wrong, at times it felt like I had lost all language, swimming in a sea of pleasant yet murky water, which didn't quite reveal where I was or what was ahead. I felt it, what I wanted to express, without being able to articulate it. I had to check the most common words in the dictionary, words that were familiar to me, words that should have been at my fingertips. Sometimes I knew them in English, but it bugged me that I could not think of the German equivalent. Or I knew vaguely what I wanted to say in German, but could not for the life of me remember how to express it in English. Now, we'll come back to the rest of this quote, but I want you to
Where did
comment
you
on this
pull that up
before.
from? I
Well,
do
you said
remember,
it.
but I can't remember where that would be. Good research.
Well, you, you gave that interview. So, and I found this very, very interesting because it really connected, and connecting intertextuality now to translation and to the idea of metaphors of swimming and all of that. You've used the swimming before, actually, to describe this in the same way John Palahiri has, moving from one language to the other. Would you like to sort of expand on this a little?
Yeah, that quote actually, it was quite nice to hear that, because I remember that very vividly, feeling that I'm losing all sense of language. I had a very firm grasp. German is my first language, and I had a very firm grasp of grammar, which is completely gone. But at least the words have come back. But I was not yet my English was not yet expansive enough to do what I needed it to do. And then there was a moment where nothing happened. Yet I did write a book. That's when I wrote This Is Not About Sadness. So it did work, but there was a lot of labor involved. But I think these moments for a writer, they're precious, because you have to reinvent the wheel. What's our wheel is language. So you have to really make use of something, and your metaphors become very different, because you're not just pulling up the things that are just always there. Because I couldn't remember it. I was sitting at a desk, and I couldn't remember, what is desk in German? Come on, So, and that's how basic it was. And I think it was that letting go, exactly what you were saying, letting go and swimming all the way. And you don't know if you're going to make it. And at some point, that's okay. And in a way, that's a beautiful metaphor for the story as well, because emotionally, we know how that is. When we're going through something very difficult and you have to change is inevitable. Growth is optional, right? So you have to achieve growth, you have to let go at some point and trust that you will come out the other way. And so in that way, it fits very well for the metaphor of the story that, okay, here we are. What you're going to do with it now? Are you going to let
That's
go,
great.
or are you going to hold on? And I think
That's
most
great.
people will have that at points when we're dealing with things that are very confronting. You kind of want to keep your foot on the, you don't want to dip your whole body into the water, but in the end, you have to let go, I think.
That's a really lovely way to put it. Yeah. Now, I'll come back to the rest of that quote, and we will talk about translation in greater detail in the coming minutes. But I wanted to just talk about a line in the story that I found really, really interesting, where you say, I followed Temi and let me touch her, only to not hear from her for the following 2 weeks. And I found that sort of phraseology really interesting, where you say, you let me touch her. And I was wondering why you did that there. And it took me a few seconds, but I sort of figured out what you mean. But was there a reason for that deliberate phrasing?
Yes. So this idea that Temi's not passive, but in a way that Temi's not really showing clearly whether she's in this or not. So in a way, okay, I'm going to let you do this, but I'm not going to give you the full. Yeah. What's the word? I can pull out at any minute because it's kind of you doing this and you want this. And I thought I wanted to show character in a particular way. So this is, in a way, for me to show Temi in a very, very brief half a sentence to show what Temi is about. Temi is not investing fully. The narrator is invested fully and is running behind. And Temi is allowing it. Temi probably has a ball. Temi probably has a great time. But there are people like that who can use that against you as well. That's okay. You wanted this, I'll let you. Yeah, they can pull out at any minute. I don't think Temi is. Yeah. That's what I was thinking about that sentence. I wanted to defend Temi, but why? She did what she did. Oh, she has delivered it.
Thank you very much. Now, before we actually go straight to the translator, I'll ask one short question. If we can just give a brief answer to how you think of translation, of its importance, especially for your work. We'll come back to the issue of sort of diversity in translation and who should translate whom very shortly after the translator gives very brief remarks. But can you just very broadly tell me about how important translation is for you as a writer, especially as a multilingual writer?
Yeah, I think translation is an art. I think it's essential. I admire translators. Even though I speak two languages really well, I do not translate because I think for me it would be frustrating because you don't have the freedom that the writer has to, this doesn't sound great, so I'll do it differently. So you can't really do that. And how important is it? Of course, it's really important for me. I'd love my work to be read in different languages. German is obviously very close to me, so that's really wonderful to have this project and to be included here. And it's wonderful. But also other languages, I think it's really important for writers. And I think generally for us, I mean human beings, I think it's a good thing to think outside your own context. And translation is one door in. Obviously, then it would be better if we learned a different language, because language is also a system of thinking, isn't it? So I think when you translate, that shifts slightly because you have to bring it back into that language and how that language organizes itself. So something does happen there that is different from the original. But it's important to me.
Great, thank you very much. At this point, I would like to thank all of you who are listening for hanging around. If you would like to support this project and Stimme in Afrika's, depending on where you're watching it, on the side of your screen or below your screen, you will see just exactly how you can support this with donations. Now we will look at the translation of this work by talking to Sarah Bremer as she talks to us about the particularly difficult sentences and the challenges of literary translation. We would like to point that this translation is still a work in progress and it is part of a larger project. So just keep that in mind as we talk of this translation. Now here is Sarah Bremer talking about her translation of The Swimmer.
Hallo zusammen, mein Name ist Sarah Bremer und ich bin die Übersetzerin von Olumide Popoolas Kurzgeschichte des Schwimmer. Und ich freue mich sehr, dass ich Teil dieses tollen Projekts sein darf, das Stimmen Afrikas und die Uni Düsseldorf auf die Beine gestellt haben. Und ich wurde gebeten, ein wenig über meine Übersetzung und den Prozess dahinter zu sprechen. Also habe ich mir 2 Stellen ausgesucht, über die ich gerne kurz reden möchte. Zum einen ist das der Titel, im Original lautet dieser ja The Swimmer. Und der erste Gedanke wäre es, diesen wörtlich zu übersetzen. Jedoch haben wir im Deutschen ja das Problem, dass wir uns zwischen der weiblichen oder männlichen Form entscheiden müssten. In diesem Fall also entweder die Schwimmerin oder der Schwimmer. Und für diese Geschichte wäre das aber eher schlecht, denn wir wissen ja überhaupt nicht, welches Gender die Hauptfigur hat, die im Fluss schwimmt. Und deswegen war mein nächster Gedanke, das Verb als genderneutrale Alternative zu verwenden, also den Infinitiv schwimmen, weil es so keine Hinweise darauf gibt, welches Gender der Hauptcharakter haben könnte. Das finde ich persönlich auch sehr wichtig hier, weil es ja von der Autorin, also von Olumide, so beabsichtigt war. Olumide hatte dann später noch vorgeschlagen, den Titel lieber in schwimmend, also mit D am Ende zu verändern, das Schwimmen sich zu sehr auf den Moment und die Hauptfigur bezieht und mit dem Titel des Schwimmer aber zusätzlich noch der tote Bruder und auch die Gefühlswelt und die Umstände der Hauptfigur gemeint sein können. Also ist es dann letztendlich schwimmend geworden. Die nächste Sache, über die ich sprechen möchte, kommt ziemlich am Anfang der Kurzgeschichte vor. Und zwar musste ich mich hier entscheiden, wie ich das englische Pronomen you ins Deutsche übertragen soll. Entweder mit dem unpersönlichen Mann, was ich auch zuerst verwendet habe, oder das sehr viel persönlichere du, das im Kontext der Geschichte vermutlich auch sehr viel besser passt. Den Satz I wanted to know the drowning, the losing your breathing to suffocation habe ich beispielsweise so in meine Endversion übersetzt. Ich wollte wissen, wie es ist zu ertrinken, keine Luft mehr zu bekommen, weil du erstickst. Vorher hatte ich nämlich anstatt dem Du einen Mann dort stehen, aber ich finde, mit dem Du wird das Ganze sehr viel persönlicher und der Leser kann sich sehr viel besser in die Situation hineinfühlen. Auch bei dem Satz It is hard to take your own life trifft dies für die deutsche Übersetzung zu. Zuerst habe ich ihn mit Es ist schwer, sich umzubringen übersetzt, mich dann aber ebenfalls für die persönlichere Variante Dir dein eigenes Leben zu nehmen, ist schwer entschieden. Auf diese Weise fühlt sich der Leser meiner Meinung nach der Figur noch näher und verbundener. Ich hoffe, ich konnte euch einen kleinen Einblick in meine Übersetzung geben und auch über die Entscheidungen, die man als Übersetzerin trifft. Und dann wünsche ich euch noch ganz viel Spaß und einen schönen Abend. Tschüss.
Great. Now that we've heard from Sarah Bremer, we would like to talk now about literary translation. I hope that all of you who have been listening have sent in your questions that we would talk about in a few minutes. But Olumide, Sarah talked about certain challenges with the translation, particularly the title. And because your story does not gender the protagonist, the main narrator, there arose the challenge of not being able to use the person. Otherwise, we would have had to say either der Schwimmer or die Schwimmerin. And then comes the challenge of what is the title? Shall we gender the protagonist, or shall we leave it more open? And so, what were your thoughts on how they came to to use the verb schwimmend, which sort of changes slightly the title?
No, I think, and we discussed it obviously because it's a longer project, and I was invited at some point to speak to the MA students, and it really made me aware how hard it actually is, because obviously the swimmer came very quickly, and it couldn't, even though I know the gender of the protagonist, it wouldn't help, because as I said, the swimmer is ambivalent, because who is the swimmer? They're all swimming in their own different ways. So if you gendered it in German, so it would be, then it would just be about the protagonist, and it would take away from these other characters who are also having to let go and deal with that. So I think schwimmen as a verb works really, really well, because it gives that sort of metaphorical meaning of I don't know where I am. Yeah, ich schwimme hier gerade. This is also something you can say in German, I think, because sometimes my expressions are a little bit outdated. But it's sort of, you're sort of unsure where you are. So I'm having to let go, and then I'm a bit on unsure ground. So you can use it for that, and in that way it works really well. But I've gained I always had a lot of respect for translators, so I can't say I gained more respect, but I thought, oh, how terrible you start, and then already the title is a big problem.
Yeah. So, I mean, one final example that she uses is where she talks about the translation of the term, it is hard to take your own life. And instead, for example, of es ist schwer, sich umzubringen, she switches it and talks about the your life, and then translating it as dir dein eigenes Leben zu nehmen ist schwer. Bringing the your into the sentence. How important was it for you to maintain the character as the object of the story?
Yeah, very important, and I think she made really good choices there and getting the emphasis right, because that's sometimes what happens with you translating it faithfully and truthfully, and then the emphasis can still switch slightly because of how you've translated the sentence and what is now becoming what you remember or what you hear more. So in this particular case with the Ertrinken, that was a really great choice because it put the emphasis back where it sort of belonged, even if the other translation was also correct. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. At this point, I'm hoping that we have all our questions in. We will be having a very short break. When we come back, Olumide, we'll talk very briefly about, as the final question, as we are taking other questions in, about diversity in translation, all of the sort of things that have been in the news recently about who should translate whom, and we'll see what you think about that. At this point, we'll have a 5-minute break, and again, you will see how you can donate to support this project on your screen on the right or at the bottom of the screen, depending on what device you're watching from. And I hope you stay with us as we go for a break now. Thank you.
You wanna give it all your heart now. You wanna give it all your soul now. You wanna give it all your heart now. You wanna give it all your soul now. Come on, give it all your heart now. Come on, give it all your soul now. Come on, give it all you got now. If you're ready, then let it show now. Come on, give it all your heart now. Come on, give it all your soul now. Come on, give it all you got now. If you're ready, then let it show now. 'Cause you're in love, spontaneously in love. Oh, you're in love, unexpectedly in love. Oh, you're in love, overwhelmingly in
welcome back. I hope that you have enjoyed the program so far and that you've sent your donations in and that you've really been edified listening to Olumide Popoola discuss her story, The Swimmer, or Schwimmend in German. We've been talking about literary translation, Olumide, and we've asked all of those questions. And so before we go to the questions that people in the chat have sent to us, I'll just give you this last question about sort of diversity in translation. We've had many stories that have come up in the past year, especially about, or in the past few months, in fact, about who should translate whom and whether the identity of the translator matters at all in translation. And if no, what are the points of sensitivity that must be brought into translation to be sure that work is transmitted from one language and world to another without losing certain things or without being without losing certain references or even respect for the cultures, identities, and persons captured in this experience. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's a great debate that we need. It's not maybe a great debate, but it's a debate that has to be had and talked about in detail. I think there's no one rule to that. It depends really on the work and what the work needs. And what you just said was interesting about the respect for the world, that you bring that over, that too, but also that you have the sensibility to feel into it. And I think what I would really love is if people are honest, and sometimes that you cannot feel into the experiences of those characters at all, or think into the writer at all, and then maybe you should not translate a particular text. So I think that is where I would like to end up, not at a hard and fast rule, these people should only translate this and that, but to look at the text and what the text needs, what is the text about. I'm always very much about voice, so voice is very important to me, that you have a sensibility to understand where is this voice created, why is it like that. Is this not, they're not just a few words here and there, they carry through. Am I understanding all of the impact in that? Because that's important in the process of translation. So I think, to rephrase that slightly, what do I think needs to be always included, and I'm sure lots of translators do that, is to think about the intention of the work, to think about the author's intention, and then the actual work itself. But I think generally, it is a debate we have to have. And I think there are works that, particularly if they're talking about racialized experiences and racialized trauma, where sometimes maybe it is better if somebody who can relate to this, even from a different context, but there is an approximation that they can bridge in a way that other people who have maybe never experienced racialized trauma cannot enter in that same way. So I think it's a case-by-case thing, and I'm just really looking for awareness, and also this moment, which I would do with lots of things. Sometimes you can say, this is not for me to do, and sometimes and other times you say, actually I can do this. For instance, with The Swimmer, I don't think this is a piece that needs somebody who's very close to me, but it needs somebody who understands what the piece is about, and then thinks into the world of the piece. Generally I do think it is good also to find. I think we all know the debates blew up around a particular poet, and we're trying to minimize having the discussion around her, so I'm not going to say, but I think generally it is good to make an effort if things are about racial issues, to maybe have somebody who can speak to that as well. I don't know. How do you feel about that? And I know this is about me, but I think this is a general.
I'll tell you what I think about it right after you answer this question that is connected, I would say, to the larger issue, which is that most writers are unable to pick their translator.
Yes. Yeah.
It in fact is the case that, we get to know of our translator much, much later. Do you think that writers should have a say in who translates them, which I think is another important question that's connected to this issue.
Generally, I don't know if you can say generally. I'll be interested in hearing what you say. But I have been translated by people who have felt like, okay, they have not made an effort to feel into the intention. And then I wonder how everything is translated. So because, if in a way you have to do some work that the imaginative writer does as well. You're also imaginative writer by means of translation. Yeah. So you're doing two things. You're hopping into the author's mind and then recreating this work in your language that you're fluent in. So yeah, I don't know. If I'm really honest, do I always want to be involved in every process of everything else around my work? I can't. Yeah, but I want to trust that people do that, and I want to trust that people also check with me and not with every word. It's not that. What I mean by intention is really, to think about who is Olumide, why would you be writing this? Yeah, so I'm not shifting it slightly to the left because that feels good for me. Because that's not your job. Your job is to represent Olumide's work in another language.
Do you think, and we have great questions from the chat, by the way, do you think that during the process of translation, the translator should talk to the writer? Because I've had situations where I didn't hear from the translator at all, like nobody, the thing is just out, it's out. So do you think that at least there should be a conversation, even if it's just to sort of feel this voice that you talk about? Or do you think that we should just trust the translator to do their job?
I want to say I want to just trust them because I think it's such a hard job. But obviously, in reality, I'm not trusting each and one of them. So to never hear from anyone, I know I have that too. When you never heard from, and then this was actually coming back to Stimmen Afrikas in this particular project, which was really interesting for me because I also learned how hard it was, and I learned what they're doing when they're translating, and obviously it felt really full of care because things were rechecked, and I could say actually, and obviously in my case because I speak German, I could intervene in a way that some of the other writers can't do, which might also be a bit annoying. So I can say, oh no, actually I would have done it like that.
Yeah.
I think it would be good. I don't, in reality, because you're busy and you're writing other things, I don't want to be involved in every translation and constantly be in contact, this and that. But I think to have a conversation, yes, why not?
So I want to thank all of you in the audience again for being such a patient audience. I will take very few questions and we will call it a day. We have questions for Olumide Popoola from the chat. Thank you very much for all the amazing questions. Olumide, did you have a particular age in mind for the protagonist? That's a question from the chat.
Yeah. Mid to end 20s.
Okay, great. Mid to end 20s. All right.
You don't agree.
Well, I trust you. No, but again, not knowing this age, I will go back and read the story, and it might give me, I think, a different experience, which, I like to say, to read is fine, but to reread is divine. It opens cracks and crevices that you did not know exist. So with this information now, I'm sure a crack will open, and I will enjoy it a second time.
Thank you.
So what inspired you to write about coping with death or loss? What inspired you to write about it?
Yeah, I have, I've experienced death in my, immediate surroundings. So it's coming from that point. And also, as I said, particularly also this mental health issue. And that's the answer to that.
Okay, so I think it's tied to the next question, which is that the topic of mental illness is still a taboo subject, often influenced by Western discourses. What role can African literature play here to break taboos without establishing new stereotypes?
to be sensitive. To again, I think, and I think this is a general thing. Everybody could do that, but here we can do that. Is to do your research, to speak to people, to be honest, and to go there. And I think, to go there. So I don't know how else to say that, but I think for me it's very important that you speak to some people who've had episodes, because quite frankly, if you look around, you will find somebody, if not in your friendship circle, in your friendship circle. So it's that thing. It's like you have to, in a way, and coming back to the metaphor of the story, immerse yourself a little bit imaginatively what that might feel like. And I have a dear friend who was going through a manic episode, and I double-checked some of these episodes with them. And it was equally a painful and beautiful thing to do this, to having seen them slip away and feeling, very... not helpless is not the right word, although I did feel helpless, but it is something to look from the outside and then to try to imagine, obviously, from the inside. Obviously, I'm not imagining the protagonist is not the one with the mental health issues as such, just having a moment, basically. But I think to be sensitive, to do your research, to go there, to speak to people, and also to think about what you want. And I have that generally. When you're writing outside of your experience, why are you doing this? What's your aim? And then ask yourself why again, and why and why and why. And then you come to the root of maybe what is stirring your interest in that. And that's my place of authenticity, is that, okay, do I just want to be sensationalist because now is the time to talk about mental health? Or am I trying to find something? I'm trying to find something. I want to follow not just my friend, but lots of people. I want to follow them and heal with them. And I want to understand something.
Great. Thank you very much for that great answer. Now, the big question of why did you not reveal the gender of the character? I think we touched on that a little, but we could talk about that. Why did the character remain without gender?
Until it was published and everybody was making, not that everybody's talking about it, but people were saying, oh, there's genderless. It didn't even cross my mind, because for me it's actually very clear. It's just how the story is written and how it came out. It was written a very short time, and it didn't need any of that. So I could now reveal other things, but there's no point to it, because it's also does it really matter?
Okay.
Does it?
So,
because I think what I really like about the momentum of this, and obviously in the translation, the problem is with German is always gendered. We had such a big, it became much more of an issue than it would have ever been in English. I don't think it would such a thing if we had just read it in English. But what I like about that is such a thing is that we now have to think about gender. And then, of course, that brings me, sort of the queer spaces or non-binary spaces. So what if this is a character who doesn't have a gender or has all types of genders? So it leaves a lot of space to insert whatever you need to at this particular moment in time.
Great. And our final question before we bring this all to a close: why did the narrator decide to go swimming? Was it a form of search for the deceased? Or is the swimming and also the going out with her friend at night maybe some sort of escape from grieving?
Yes. I think it's that definitely it's a form of grieving and drowning in your grief. When I said swimming is a metaphor for drowning, and the narrator is at this moment overwhelmed and trying to escape whatever is coming their way. So that's why they go swimming, because they don't know what else to do. And I think, that's that.
Okay. Thank you very much, Olumide. It's been an amazing, amazing time spending these 90 minutes with you. I have to say that I will read the story again, and now that I know the age of the protagonist, it will certainly be different. Thank you very much for spending this time. I also want to thank the audience for being such an amazing audience. Even though we could not see you, we're sorry. Man proposes, but Corona disposes. And in closing, I would like to remind you again about donations. You could donate. Look at the side of your screen or the bottom. You will see how you can do this. If you would like to, if you heard the song in the beginning, the opening trailer, that's a song by Mariama, a singer and songwriter. Mariama is having an event, a live show right now in Hamburg, and you can look at the link from the platform Drin geblieben, and the song will be, you will see Summer in My Heart again, and I hope you enjoy that. Tomorrow, there are 2 events that you can also enjoy, one by Sinzo Anza from the DRC and by Karen Jennings of South Africa. We want to thank you again for being such an amazing audience. We want to thank Stimmen Afrikas for this amazing series of events, and to all of the people who have made this possible. Thank you again to Olumide, Sarah, Oliver, Yuta, Momo for making sure that we are still online. Thank you very much, and do have a pleasant evening.
Ringing in the air running through my hands resting in your hands. Summer in my heart again. Summer in my heart again. An answer to a smile. Oh my, I didn't see the night rush by. Lovers, you can find them anywhere you like. But when you love, it's the first